Okay, so it's 12:30, so we're going to go ahead and get things started while people trickle in from the outside here into the room, so we can be respectful of our panelists and our speakers, and get started right away. If y'all don't know me, my name is Kevin Lang. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Veterinary and Biomedical Sciences. I help organize the RIDE Research Seminar Series in conjunction with the Research Office. I just wanted to just say a few quick words, mostly thank yous to the folks in the research office, Kinsey, Jessica, Tibber, for their help in helping organize this seminar series, and to thank you all for joining us here for our panel on navigating academic partnerships, both within and the university and then externally. So I'm not going to say too much more. I'm just going to introduce our moderator, Dr. Maxim Cheeran, and he's going to say a few words about what we have going on today. So thank you.
All right. So welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Research Partnership panel. I'm Maxim Cheeran. I'm the Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs for the college. I'm a professor in the Veterinary Population Medicine Department. I have a research program that's doing pretty well, given all the circumstances that we have now. I am honored to talk about research ethics, and it's something as a faculty affairs, Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs, and as we hear a lot of questions about research ethics and how we do research and what is the right way to do research, right? And so those are the kinds of topics that I'd like to bring up today and talk about. We are going to keep this conversational, and this includes everybody on Zoom. I think Dr. Kevin, you're keeping track of chat from Zoom. I think I can see something here, so I may keep track of it if you. And we will open up this this panel for questions. Please ask questions. This is your chance to ask all the difficult questions. We have a really good, excellent group of panelists here. Very esteemed. They do all kinds of different kinds of research, both fundamental to community engaged research. Lots of different ways, lots of different perspectives we're going to have today. You know, I started research, gosh, several years ago, and and I'm not going to tell you how many years, but when I was in grad school, we focused on something. I worked with cytomegalovirus, and that's really was my area. I knew everything about cytomegalovirus. Partnerships were there, but they were not that big of a deal, right? We didn't do a lot of partnerships. We worked on fundamental research and we did independent research. Now today, research has changed. Its landscape has changed considerably. What it has done, though, is helped us to expand the questions that we ask. We're now able to ask complex questions that transcend disciplines. We're able to make solutions that are, beyond what one single group knows. And so, but with that comes complexities, right? And complexities of how do you do it right? And I think that's the focus of our conversation. It's going to be our focus of our conversation today. So before anything else, I'd like the panelists to introduce themselves. Will tell us a little bit about who they are, what they do. If they have some insights on ethics and research, they'll probably talk about that as well. Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Maxim. Thank you all for coming today. I'm Dr. Peter Larsen. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Veterinary and Biomedical Sciences. I also co-direct the Minnesota Center for Prion Research and Outreach alongside Dr. Wolf. I've been a faculty member here since 2018. My research background is in molecular biology and mammalogy. The research program that I oversee here is very diverse. And I have a statement of, well, we operate broadly under this umbrella of One Health research and emerging zoonotic disease. It's pretty vague, and there's a reason why, and that's because we have research projects that are focused on prions, research projects are focused on bats, on understanding vector-borne disease and ticks and mosquitoes, and it's super diverse. So if you would have described what my research program is today versus what I thought it would be 10 or 20 years ago, I would have had no idea. But the diversity that we have does lend itself to a variety of partnerships, a variety of collaborative research that spans the globe. So lots of international partnerships, some industry related research, and then also we have launched a startup company from the U of M. And so we'll be able to talk a little bit about that aspect of ethics today. So I will pass this mic to Dr. Wolf.
Hi, thank you for having me, and for everybody who's on Zoom as well as here joining us today. Tiffany Wolf. I am a wildlife epidemiologist and veterinarian. I co-direct the Minnesota Center for Prion Research and Outreach alongside Peter. Before I started here at the university, I worked as a clinical veterinarian at the Minnesota Zoo. And even as far back as that, I was working with a lot of partners outside of the zoo and really helping to facilitate, in my role as a veterinarian, a lot of research that was happening with wildlife in Minnesota. As I transitioned to becoming faculty here, then I started taking on a role of helping to lead my own research. And so those partnerships have evolved over time where, when I originally came to the table, I was helping other people meet their needs, their research needs, and then transition to trying to figure out how do we combine our skill sets to meet all of our needs. There were some growing pains with that, learning how to do it. When we get trained as researchers, we're trained to be independent researchers. How many people have heard that term? You're going to be an independent scientific researcher. The kind of work that I do as an epidemiologist, it's all observational. And there is no independence with that. I have to work with other people in everything that I do, and that is both rewarding and it's also difficult at times. I work across disciplines, a lot of researchers in other colleges here at the university. I work with a lot of people at different levels of government, and I work with community members as well, and find ways to engage them more in our research, both on the front end and the back end, which is really enjoyable. And I work very closely with a lot of our tribal nations here in Minnesota and elsewhere in the Midwest, which takes a whole other way of thinking about partnerships and what it means to really nurture those into really true and trusting partnerships. So I'll stop with that.
Hi, my name's Tim Johnson. I am a professor in Vet and Biomedical Science Department. I've been here since 2007, and it's been like Tiffany and Peter have mentioned, the paths don't always go the direction you think they're going to go or you might anticipate. So when I started in 2007, so I'm a microbiologist, I've always had an interest in poultry diseases, mostly bacterial diseases of poultry. And so we worked a lot on E. coli early on and trying to understand the genetic mechanisms of how they cause disease. And so that was a pretty siloed activity, and there wasn't a lot of research partnerships at that time. But over time, things evolved here, and I evolved as a researcher, and opportunities came up outside of the Twin Cities. So Dr. Cardona helped to open up a lab in Wilmer, Minnesota, which, if you don't know, is the heart of turkey production in Minnesota. And there's a few different large companies out there, but there's also a lot of, those are poultry companies, but there's also a lot of feed additive companies and smaller startups out there as well. And so this opportunity came in about 2014 to start working and doing some activities out in that lab. And of course, the next year, HiPath AI hit for the first time and caused chaos, as we all know that story. But what it created was opportunities to start interacting more with people in the poultry industry and just have conversations about other things besides AI, because they were mostly sick of talking about AI and they wanted to talk about other issues they have. And over the last 10 years, what that's led to is just a lot of wide-ranging topics of partnerships that have been developed. And a lot of it still focuses around things that I love doing, which is looking at genomes of pathogens, right? But it's also moved into, feed additive trial studies, like one we're going to start in a couple of weeks here. And the range of partnerships has gone from everywhere from, like, if you think of the top largest companies in the US, we've worked with some of those. We've also worked with people who are on a shoestring budget startup company that's just trying to get data to further understand their product. And so it's been fun on that end to work with these companies, and we can talk about that. But also, this has opened up partnerships with organizations like the Minnesota Department of Health and the CDC, where we can partner with the poultry industry and try to connect them to these government agencies where historically those relationships have been either fractured or difficult to navigate. So in some ways, it's allowed us to be more of a conduit between those two entities and to try to bridge those gaps. So there's a lot of different angles that you can go with these types of partnerships that I'm sure will come up in discussions.
All right, well, thank you so much. So you've heard a molecular biologist working with the industry. You've heard about a bacterial microbiologist working with commodity groups, and a community engaged researcher who's an epidemiologist by training, right? Was expanded into community research. So I'm going to open it up for questions. We can talk about a broad range of topics. We can talk about data ownership. We can talk about authorship, conflicts of interest. What are the different types of conflicts of interest? What are the pressures of publication? Working with industry and working with commodity groups and communities. What does publications look like, and what are the forces that play into it, and what are the ethics around it? And of course, there's proprietary research and openness in research, right? We struggle with those kinds of things. So all of these are parts of are all possible questions that you can ask. Okay. So questions. If you don't have questions, I will ask the question too. And I think Tibor, Kinsey, you have a microphone. Okay. So wait for the microphone before you ask your question. Raise your hand. Those on Zoom, please open up your mics and you can ask a question. Raise your hand and I'll call you so we can ask a question. All right, let's get you all started. And I'm gonna put together a question for each of you, because data and data ownership is something that we struggle with sometimes. Who owns data? How do we curate data that are from a molecular biology perspective versus epidemiology perspective? What are the types of data you get, and how are you good stewards of that data? What are the things that we need to think about? And so when you set up collaborations, okay, how do you set up agreements of data ownership How do you set up agreements for usage rights? How do you identify what data can be used by whom and how? And what are the publication expectations? How does that differ from if you were doing your own research? Okay, and we'll start with Peter. Do you want to?
Sure. So yeah, this is a really important issue. There's going to be a theme in most of my answers here, and that is communication, and when in doubt, ask. Communication, and when in doubt, ask. The university has policies that have to be followed for data that is produced within the university. And what we've done in our research teams is we sort of have a tiered approach, right? And ultimately the PIs that are, if you're doing funded research that's on a grant or whatnot, the PI is responsible for the data that's produced and how it's managed. So every lab should have a data management strategy, and that should be informed by the university policies. And so in our research collaboration, we have monthly team meetings, and there is a specific discussion about the data that's being produced. What are those policies? And we open the floor for people to ask, and we make sure that folks understand that we do have agreements with the Minnesota DNR, that we do have agreements with the tribal nations, that we are working with international partners, right? And so open, honest communication, and if anything's unclear, talk to your supervisor, right? Talk to the PI, and if the PI, if it's unclear, they need to talk to the university. Is it Rio, right? Rio office to understand how data is managed. And so let's use that to get the conversation rolling. I'll pass the mic down.
I've been thinking a lot lately about working with tribal data. Well, not just lately, but lately because we have a new project in the college studying HPAI and wildlife, and tribal partners are getting involved, and they are working with other researchers in our college who have never worked with our tribal partners before. And so it's been a really good opportunity to go through this process anew with people I've worked with maybe for a long time, but who are working with others now in our college. And we're starting from basically ground zero with questions like, do you want a data sharing, or do you need a data sharing and ownership agreement, which is a legally binding document that states how the university and the tribe understand how the data is going to be used, who owns it, how it's going to be protected, shared or not shared. Do you need a memorandum of understanding? I'm not good with acronyms, but if you ask about a DSOA or an MOU, I with you all the way. And a memorandum of understanding is not a legally binding document, but I appreciate them because they tell me how I'm going to work hand in hand with the partner directly on the ground. This is how we're going to do the work together. This is how we're going to communicate regularly. If there's a conflict, this is how we're going to try and solve it. If we need to talk about authorship, let's talk about it now before the project starts. And then, we'll reference if we are relying on a DSOA, the legal documents between the university and the tribe, we reference that, that's kind of the overarching direction that protects the data. So these are different ways that I've approached it and they really are helpful. Like, it seems like, oh, it's so onerous to go through and all of these processes to get a project started, but I think that they are very helpful to make sure that you're having important conversations, especially if they're with new partners early on, so that all the expectations are out on the table. Everybody knows what they need, what they want, what the goals are. And that's all transparent and upfront.
Yeah, maybe I'll speak to at a little different angle. So if you're thinking of partnerships in terms of maybe a company or a group comes to you and wants you to partner with them on research, some of you in this room are aware, but probably not all, that there's different ways that can happen. So there's everything ranging from they pay you for an activity, and this is called like fee for service. You do that activity, they own the data, right? And then as it scales up, it goes up to, you could establish a contract, and the research contract is where in the contract is outlined all the details about who owns the data, who gets the data, publication rights, and oftentimes when you work with larger companies, there's a lot of legal people involved in that, and it's frustrating, and it takes like 6 months sometimes to get it done. And so that's one of the barriers too, is if you want to get started quickly on something, you have to really consider the different options. And then there's another option, which is less commonly used, which is just a gift. That there's pros and cons of each of these, right? So the contract route takes a long time, but it's going to be clearly spelled out what you're going to do in terms of reporting, in terms of providing data to that group you're working with, when and where you can publish, who gets the right, like often, and it's something that if you go that route, you need to read that very carefully. Don't rely on just the university lawyers to read it, because it's going to say in there specifics about what rights the company might have prior to publishing before you can actually submit that article for review. And sometimes they'll put in there, we reserve a right of 6 months to review the manuscript before you can actually submit it. So things like that are important to consider. And again, as has been mentioned, the communication piece is key, because if you're communicating with your partner about what your expectations are versus what theirs are, and what is the mutual benefits of this relationship, then everybody typically is going to be happy, because it's a lot easier to navigate that. The gift route is just they give you money and they trust you to do research with it. That's a dangerous route. It's a nice route, because here's a chunk of money and you can go work on an endeavor that we're interested in. But the flip side of that is that without any legally binding documents, there oftentimes gets to be differences of opinion as to how you're using that money between you and the company, unless you're communicating frequently. And so that's just one piece of thinking about how do I navigate a potential relationship with an external partner where they might be funding the research. And I've got examples, but I'll stop there for now. See what else you got for questions.
Yeah, Dr. Johnson, I'm just going to have you hold that thought for a second, because Carol Cardona is asking about regulatory agencies. So we may do work with regulatory agencies under a contract, but what about infectious diseases, HPAI was mentioned here,
Right.
and you find that what are those regulatory components then that come into this mix, and how do they complicate things?
They definitely complicate things if it's a reportable infection, right? Because if you find something, you're oftentimes obligated to report on it. And I think that's what Dr. Cardone is getting at. But to give you just another example, salmonella. So CDC is very interested in salmonella. They sequence every clinical isolate that comes through the departments of health. And so there's lots of data there. And then they also go out and sample retail meats. They sample live animals, and they use that for source tracking of outbreaks. And for that reason, the industries and the industries would be any food animal industry, have been very hesitant to generate that data and make it publicly available. And so when you've got a partnership with a regulatory agency such as CDC or MDH, but it also bridges with a partnership with industry, you have to think really carefully about how can I generate the data on one end, but not necessarily share it completely with the regulatory agency. And I'm not saying hide the data, but I'm saying what is the reason that this partnership exists is because they're trusting you to do something that's going to help move forward the ability to track disease, right? And it helps the industry stop the spread of salmonella in their herds and flocks. But at the same time, you have to, that's where this is going off of what the path Dr. Cardona was going on. But I think it's important to just think about and be creative sometimes about what can you do in terms of de-identifying data, protecting sequence data, things like that, so that you can still use it for your publication purposes and the scientific question and keep the ethical standards you've got as a scientist, but you're also protecting that relationship and not necessarily doing things that they would not want you, or giving information that they would not want you to give. So that sometimes is a difficult path to navigate too.
To follow up on this conversation about reportable disease and whatnot, it's really important to have conversations with your research partners, about the research that's about to be conducted, and go through the what ifs. We work with chronic wasting disease, and the way that prion disease spreads, it can be circulating in animals and in deer, and they look totally healthy, right? And so, you have to talk with your research partners of, if you're working in an area that disease is not known to be, what happens if you find it, right? And it is a reportable disease. And, we've had to navigate some situations like that in the past. And it's really important to have those discussions early on, upfront, so that it helps guide what could happen down the road. Because if you're scrambling after you find something, then that can be difficult to navigate.
I think there was a question here.
Yeah, so mine is kind of a two-part question. So with the current political climate and the uncertainty of like federal grant funding, from kind of a scientific or like research ethics standpoint, part one, how do you anticipate this will change the types or topics of science we're able to research kind of within the biology fields? And then part two, what advice would you have for us who are eventually moving into like a new researcher role or like a young researcher role to not fall into any major pitfalls?
That's such a good question, and I'm not sure we know all the answers quite yet. But I was just on a call yesterday where we were talking about, and I am in a partnership that involves federal government partners and tribal partners, and we're studying CWD and its impacts on tribal communities. And our conversation was about how we're going to navigate publishing our results if we can't use certain words, and how we're going to be how we're going to navigate truth with that kind of those kind of boundaries on our truth, right? Our team feels some optimism that we can find a way to navigate that because we have a good use of the English language and are willing to be creative. But, honestly, I am waiting to see how this turns out. Because of our government partners' roles, that manuscript has to be reviewed before it can be published. And it used to be reviewed to ensure that there were no policy implications. But now it's going to be reviewed for the language that we use. And so we're hopeful that we can be creative in how we talk about the situation, but we've also talked about, if there's, we're working with tribal communities that have been marginalized and persecuted in their history for the culture that they embody. And so, there may be things that they don't want us, that's something that we have learned, part of our research findings, that they don't want us to publish right now, especially because that can be really misconstrued and used against them. And we have to respect that. First and foremost, we have to respect that. And that means it may change what our publication is about. It may not be just the scientific research that we set out to write about, but instead take a different perspective in what we write about. So thinking about it from both sides of the situation. But yeah, I think these are, it's a tough situation we're in right now that is going to demand some creativity on our part, and to be able to navigate that. And I think with enough people on board who are willing to take on that extra challenge, I'm hopeful that we can do it. But it's a great question.
So yeah, we're definitely in a period of flux right now. There's a lot of anxiety out there, and faculty members have been talking about this. And bottom line is we have to be patient. There's a lot of chaos that's being navigated, and we don't have all the answers, right? And what the individual units, the teams can do is talk with each other and share concerns, right? But then identify, like Dr. Wolf was saying, creative ways to adapt, right? So being flexible and adapting, I think, is going to be really, really important. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because going through what we're about to go through, we're going to learn a lot, and that can make us stronger in the future.
I'm going to ask the second part of that question. Is there, how would you say the early career folks, the young investigators, young researchers here who want to go into research, what sort of advice would you give them as they navigate research ethics, and what are the things that they should be looking for while they're pursuing research careers?
Yeah, so I'll touch first, just finishing up on the last thought. I mean, I've been here, I think I've been here the longest of the three of us. Yeah, so been through a few administrations, and there's always adversity that comes your way, and it's uncertain times. I think we've had many years of uncertain times in this college, and that we've gotten through it. So I don't have any doubts that we're going to get through it again. Just thinking about what we were talking about, though, one thing that came to mind that we've done with different projects is to think about. Well, I'll give you an example. So we had a pathogen genomics center of excellence. It was this big thing that was developed by the CDC, and it involved 7 or 8 different departments of health and universities. It was solid funding for 5 years is what we were told, right? It was a grant, basically. And inexplicably last year it got cut. And so why I bring this up is just thinking about the plan B always before you even start the plan A. Like thinking about the what ifs, especially what if related to if something happens to funding, how am I going to pivot? And how am I going to, I wouldn't say salvage, but just turn what I've done into something better, right? What can I do at that point? The other thing, just thinking about partnerships, is if, like as an early career investigator, publications are very important on the list of priorities, right? And so I think what you need to do in those situations is, and this has been effective for us, is to carve out, so if we're going to start a project with someone, whether it be an agency in the government or an industry stakeholder, the first things, some of the first things to carve out is what data is going to be generated. But no matter what happens and no matter what issues there might be with sensitivities and language or whatever, what's publishable from this, no matter what, right? And so that way, irrespective of what happens while this project goes on, at the end of the day, you're going to have data that you can put into publication. You don't have to worry about pressures from either the industry partner or the government or wherever. That's your ethical research that doesn't bend, right? And there's almost always, when you look at data that's being generated, there's something in there that fits into that bucket. And then there's the other pieces about, well, what are the other possible publications and what might I do with those? But those are in some way maybe dependent on your partner. So we've always taken that approach where you kind of tier the different ways that you're going to use the data and eventually publish it. And that's especially important with students. If you're involving students early on in this, is that they will have data that they can use no matter what the outcome, right? So we always try to think about that when we're starting partnerships like that. Go back to your question. No, sorry. Probably went way off the
No, that's fine. So do you do something different in your laboratories to help not teach, but at least expose your students and postdocs and residents to the complexities of partnerships and how they would navigate ethics around that?
I think that we have a tendency to involve our trainees and our staff and others in the lab to help think through how are we going to navigate this. Our trainees are a very important part of that process because oftentimes it's fresh minds and creative thinking and outside of the box, which is often what is really needed. I like what you said about Plan B. Plan B or Plan C, always good, very important. And diversifying, which is related to having these other plans, because that diversification, we've already heard this year, diversification in what we study, how we get funded, that is the way that we continue to be successful. And so not putting all of our eggs in one basket, that's for you, Tim, is the way to go.
So in my lab, we have a weekly lab meeting, and the first half is that we've been doing this since before the pandemic, I think, and we maintain it through the pandemic. But the first half of the lab meeting, it's not a traditional lab meeting in the sense that, everyone's presenting data and we're talking about experiments and whatnot. That's done throughout the week in different capacities. But what we do is the first half is devoted to professional development, and it's talking about, it's me sharing what we're navigating, that week with various projects, basically being very open and letting the team ask questions and witnessing what it is like, right, to navigate various issues that come up. And many of these are with partnerships that we are navigating with state agencies, with international partners. And so creating that, I think it's really important for students and mentees to have access to that and see it play out in real time and learn from it, right? And then the second half of our meeting is devoted to what we call orange frogs. And so it's optimistic thinking. And so we try to end things on a good note.
There's a question back. Adrian.
I would love to know your thoughts on folks who traditionally had mostly federal funding and are looking for new partnerships. How do they get started and how do they know what those ethical considerations are as they're getting started?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably going to be different answers because of the different people that are partners that we work with, but just thinking of it from the perspective of people in industry or companies that are interested in working with you, how does that, so the first part of the question, how does that get started? I mean, for me, it was, people aren't necessarily just going to come knocking at your door. I mean, sometimes they do, but most of the time, these partnerships start through trust building type things. So you're at a conference and you meet with somebody from a company that and I think coming back to the last question, remembering that this is not just about research, it's about education too. And education is a two-way street, so that we're always thinking about the mutual benefits of these relationships. So yes, we have research capability and expertise. A lot of times companies are coming in just looking to tap into your brain a little bit and talk through things. And the idea of a research project might not come for months to possibly years later, right? So in terms of starting to build those relationships, it's really grassroots to me about just meeting with people, talking with them, putting time, but also choosing your investments wisely, because there's a lot of people that would be wanting to talk to you and suck knowledge out of you, which is fine, but you've got to strategize as to which ones make the most sense, which ones have the most potential, which ones are best aligned with me. I mean, if somebody comes to me asking for swine viral research, I'm probably not going to have that conversation because I don't work with pigs and I don't work much with viruses, right? So aligning yourself and prioritizing those conversations, I think, is a really important first step to starting to establish those relationships.
All right.
We concur. We concur.
There's a question.
You can see. Hi, everybody. Alonso Guedes, VCS Research Office. My question is in regards to partnerships with AI. There is more and more use of that technology to connect with people, to help writing, and some of it might involve data. And so I just want to hear from you guys your thoughts about using that technology, perhaps with data that you have collected in order to, perhaps write a manuscript or write reports or those things. How do you navigate that?
I don't think I'm there yet, Alonso. But I think if I were just thinking, projecting, and if there were opportunity to leverage AI with, and I'm thinking about my tribal partners, we would have to have conversations about that early on, about what that means, what AI is going to do for us, how we're going to use it. It would be no different than any of our other conversations about how we use data. So I think that's I know would be on the horizon for me if I were going to shift into that, but I'm not doing that yet.
So I think we had last year. I think we had a discussion on AI, and one thing that I thought was interesting is that every individual PI research team is going to view AI differently, and some are going to be fully embracing it, for leveraging it for lots of different reasons, and maybe more open to how it's used. Others are going to be very sort of gun shy with it and not want to go down that path. So, you know, I think we came to you know, at the end of that panel discussion, it's a very fluid situation, and people are going to use it in different ways. Bottom line is, it's with us. Its usage is going to expand. And my view of it is that we should use it, but very carefully, and we have to talk about it, right? We have to understand what the implications are, and what that downstream product is and how it's going to be used. So open communication, but yeah, it really just depends on the research team and what their focus is.
All right, there's a question here that I think is a change of pace a little bit, but it's an important question. So what have you had partnerships that did not work midway through? How have you been able to navigate that?
How much time do we have?
I got about 45 minutes.
So yeah, it's tough. So yeah, you'll be going along, and all of a sudden something happens, and there could be a flashpoint, right? And you know, you have to, if things aren't going well, why? How did they get there? Usually, 99% of the time, it's a lack of communication. And so, you know, no collaboration, no partnership is perfect. You have to be a good listener. You know, that's what I've learned over the last, how many years have been here? Since I joined the university and started my role as a PI, is you have to listen. You have to listen to your partners, listen to your collaborators, understand things from their point of view, and they need to reciprocate, right? So communication. If things are starting to go down a path that you think is worrisome, or if you have misgivings, talk. Because what happens is it can spiral out of control. And so, you know, Dr. Wolf and I do this more frequently now, is if we have to communicate basically in real time to make sure that the research activities that we're doing are collaborative, and they're done in a way that will not result in conflict. So yeah, in my experience, those partnerships that have resulted in conflict, it can happen for lots of different reasons, but basically, you know, you have to come to the table, you have to listen to their point of view, they have to do the same on their end, but you have to identify a path forward, because what you don't want is it for to spiral out of control and hurt students, right? Hurt the mentees and impact their career paths. And you have to think about the greater good of the team, and how, you know, you want them to succeed. So every situation of conflict is different and can originate for different things, but I think the vast majority of the time it's from a lack of communication.
Totally agree that communication is like the foundation for good partnerships. But, you know, have there been partnerships that haven't worked out as you hoped? Absolutely. It's hard to find people who are partnering broadly that haven't had some stumbles along the way. And worst case scenario, those partnerships end. And they have. And that process can actually be done successfully as well. And so it can be incredibly difficult to navigate, and difficult trying to come out on the other end in that process, but it's okay if there's recognition that the partnership is not healthy, it's not going to work, and and making an effort to do it responsibly is probably a win in and of itself, if it's come to that. So yeah, I think it's okay to be able to recognize that as well.
I can think of one specific example where we had a contract and a research contract and got halfway into it with the research, and the company decided that they were no longer interested in that research and they wanted us to use the rest of the money to do something completely different, which wasn't outlined in the agreement. So it created a really uncomfortable situation because I liked this company, liked working with them, but it was going down a topic that we had no interest in and probably didn't have the resources to do either. So we had to have a difficult discussion about what do we do at this point? Like, this is not a path that we can really go down. So what can we do as a compromise to salvage this contract? And what we ended up landing on was a modification of the existing work where it was still staying on the original topic, but just trying to do something that generated data that was more useful to what they were interested in at the time. Most of the challenges that I've experienced are with timelines. And so like if you do a research contract, they're going to ask for what's your end date, because that's what the legal team wants, is the end date. But what my experience has been, whether it's in that contract or if it's just on a different piece of paper, you should establish some realistic timelines. Don't over commit yourself to doing something that you say, I can do this in 6 months, but in reality, it's probably going to take 9. So maybe you should be saying a year rather than 6, right? And also, and having milestones in there so that because the biggest thing most of these partners want to see is data along the way so that they know that the project is progressing, that they can see some of the preliminary data. They don't want to wait until the very end to see whether things worked or not. And so that solved a lot of problems just by really outlining what are we going to do at different stages throughout this project. And then if something comes up where things don't go as planned, don't wait 6 months to tell them that. Tell them right away so that science is 90% failure. So it's okay that things don't always work. You've got to communicate that. They're going to understand, and then you move forward from there.
Other questions? Dr. Mulgrew.
What is the best or worst advice that you've received about partnerships or partnering over the years?
Any money is good money.
I don't know necessarily about advice, but I would say, sometimes that you could interact. I think Tim was alluding to this before. You can get in situations where it's just not a good fit, right? And if you try to force things to happen, or if the partnership doesn't organically come together, that can lead to problems down the road, right? And so when you're making decisions about the variety of partnerships that you're going to consider entering into, what's your value system? Do you think it's a good fit, right? Is the research a good fit? Is the team a good fit? And just sort of, if you have that opportunity, going through that and then letting that help guide your decision. So I think that's some maybe good advice I would give.
I think I like the advice that can be applied in a lot of different contexts, to just stop talking and listen. Listen to what their needs are, and stop talking about what we need. Just listen.
I don't think I have much more to I don't think of how to phrase this. So just be, this is not bad advice that I've gotten, but just thinking about things to think about. Be sure that your research partner truly is in it for you as well, and not for themselves, because there's been situations we've gotten into where there's always handshake agreements, right? Where we're going to do this work and this is on paper. And then when that's done, we want to foster this collaboration and help you down the road. And then the project gets done and they disappear basically, or you see them a year from now. And priorities change so often in industry that what they're interested, I touched on this before, but what they're interested in last year is probably not even on their radar the following year, right? And so just be sure, if you really want those types of relationships, that you have to use your gut instinct as to, is this going to be mutually beneficial, and is there evidence that it will be, not just somebody telling you that it will be, because I've had that come up before. So.
So, with the current pressures of research that we have today, research integrity sometimes takes a back space, right? Especially with partnerships, it gets really complex. How do you navigate research integrity? How do you know, or how do you tell if the research data that you're looking at is done right? I think with your partners, any advice on that?
I really like involving my partners in the research as much as possible, so that they can help me do that. Conversation just yesterday, we were talking about writing up and publishing our results. And I don't think it had dawned on some of the people who, or at least one person's mind, that my plan was to involve our other partners. They were going to be co-authors. They were going to help us write this up. And they're not, one of them is not a scientist. He didn't go to college, but he is a cultural knowledge holder in his community. And I want him to be part of our manuscript to ensure exactly what you were asking about. How do we make sure that our science is appropriate? How do we ensure it is rigorous? He's going to help us do that. So I think that's part of it, at least, is having our partners be part of the entire process, not just the data collection part.
Story again. So here's another interesting one that relates to this, I think. So we had a research, I think it was a contract, but I can't remember. And the whole goal of it was to run this bird trial, generate lesion data, and test product to see if the product reduced the severity of disease in the model. And so we did all the work, eventually published the paper. The paper concluded that there was not a statistically significant reduction in lesion score. So using replicates and doing it the right way, there wasn't a reduction. They took the raw data from that, because it was still their data too, right? We published we had what we thought was right. They made a slide deck to bring to customers that they went out and used the same data, but just basically concluded that it works. Like, our product reduces lesions because it went down 0.05. So it's a reduction that means something. Then, which would, whatever. But then I went to a meeting, and somebody came up and asked me, well, they're saying this, but your paper says something different. So, and then you're faced with, well, how do I don't want to trash on the company, but I also am not going to say that the product actually did have a significant effect on lesion score. So having conversations about how data will be used beyond just your paper is something to think about as well, because if you're doing it as a true partnership, you're generating that information for them to use as well, and you can't always anticipate how they're going to go and use it.
So would you have these conversations at the time of publication or at the end of the project? Where,
I would now after experiencing that, yeah. But I mean, that was something it was not on my radar that they would go make a slide deck and go out to the people they're trying to sell product to and give a different story than what the paper gave, right? So yeah, now we do have those conversations, like what are you going to do if we disagree in the results? And it's good to have them, because then at least you have an idea of what they might do or how they might handle it.
So, communication, again, that theme. We use Zoom all the time now. I don't necessarily like Zoom, but what it does is it makes it so you can meet more frequently with your partners, right? Especially international partners. And so making sure that you do have meetings where you were talking about these things. And then what you can do on your own end is ensure that there's best practices followed, in the lab that goes all the way back to the lab notebook, right? Making sure that everything's documented, making sure that there's conversations going on with your supervisor, lab manager, PI, and just establishing those best practices throughout the entire lab, and then monitoring that over time. Okay, and that's going to help ensure data integrity.
yeah, so you talked about data integrity and within your lab, do you check integrity of your data with your partner, a research partner, for example? Was another lab that they run labs differently? How does that?
Yeah, I mean, that can go through, there could be monthly updates, right? Where data is presented and talking with them and asking questions, right? Asking questions, digging into the data, how the results were generated, them, the partner explaining the data. And if there's a gap, you'll figure that out, hopefully, like if they're not trying to actually hide something. But you have to ask critical questions and have them explain how the data were generated.
Yeah, Rob's.
Yeah, just sorry, Rob. Just tack on to that. I mean, I think the thing trust but verify is probably really relevant here, and that's what Peter was really getting at. But especially when I think of these examples coming out of this university where 10 years later we're talking about somebody who manipulated images, and now an entire line of research that followed and then later debunked, was all started with that one person, right? So yeah, just to reiterate the importance of just thinking through data and talking about it, especially if it's coming from another group. And I would expect the same if we were sharing data, that they ask questions, press it. That's the whole point of science, right? So.
Hey, Maxim, can I?
This issue of trust, I think is really a key issue. And all my work is collaborative, but mostly NIH grants, right? So when you agree to work with someone and you guys put together an NIH grant where you're both contributing data and maybe haven't worked directly with each other, do you guys, and I've figured out ways of dealing with this, but sometimes your partner isn't always trustworthy. And they walk off with your data, especially if and this is for the young researchers, if you have a subcontract on someone else's grant, it's very easy for them to get rid of you. NIH does not respect those relationships. So it's easy for someone to just say, okay, I don't need you. Now I got the grant, I don't need you anymore. So I was wondering if you guys had any ideas for like, you know, how do you pick out trustworthy? I mean, I always do it by, I ask around. I ask around the community and I ask what they're like. Some people I just, don't answer. But wondering if you guys had any further ideas about that.
I don't know. I think that's a really good approach. And yeah, I mean, we know a lot of people in the community. We have friends, and I think asking around is good. So yeah, I I feel like recently I was thinking I need to do that more. Peter hooked me up with another epidemiologist, and I'm like, was this the right decision? But you know what? I know, I thought we had this trust. But yeah, and I think like especially early on too. So we have our community, and for the young researchers, you're going to be growing that community. But you have your own network, and so tapping that network is important. That's a great step. People who I don't know really well that I'm starting out new research with. I also make sure that we are communicating and meeting regularly, and I involve everyone in that. My grad students, their grad students, so that we're all, and our external partners, so that we're all on the same page as we're all getting to know each other. And I don't know that that's necessarily the end all be all, but it's just a way for me to, as we're trying to get the work done, to also establish more of that trust, that, especially if we didn't have a solid place or we hadn't worked together before. But I do like checking the references.
So I like telling the story of like one of the most successful partnerships that I have right now is happened because I had a chance encounter. It's with Dr. John Oliver in School of Public Health, and we bumped into each other. I was brand new faculty. We literally bumped into each other in the stairwell of a parking garage, and we had like this 10-minute conversation just about stuff and about research, and we started to get really excited. We had an idea, and 3 years later, we landed a NIH R1, right? And so you don't always know, right? But what happened there was this organic, common love for science and excitement, and but there was also a good fit with the students, the teams, and whatnot that we saw over time. So yeah, I mean, it can be very, very difficult, but the most successful partnerships that I've had have happened organically. They weren't forced.
Dr. Lee, I think I saw your hand go up and then it went back down. Do you have a question? Go ahead.
Not a question, actually a comment. So the data integrity piece is very important. I think for our junior investigators in the audience, I've been in this business long enough to see papers getting retracted because of data integrity issue. It happened quite often, more and more often, because more and more people are paying attention to it. There's a whole group of people that's everyday, activity for them is to go and look at publications and looking for, anomalies, right? We call them anomalies because, we can't really tell until you look carefully, right? Data fabrications, image manipulations, things like that. So I think it's important to convey to your research partner, whoever that person is, that all the data that generated by them gonna have to be kept in a safe place, and that it's gonna have to be reviewed, right? Gonna have to be shared with not just you as a partner, but also when time comes to publication, to submissions, many journals now, well, now that I'm in the role of being editor-in-chief of different journals, I can see that the landscape of publishing changing too, whereas before, 30, 40, 50 years ago, journals rely on the integrity of the researchers, right, the PI, to submit data, to publish data that, it's sort of a guarantee that it's right. But these days, the journal don't do that anymore. They'd be foolish to put the trust on anybody. So now journals are more and more journal require you to submit not just the data that you put together in figures that look pretty and nice and make sense, but they actually require you to submit raw data. Even Western blot, right? All the Western blot that you did, original, ugly looking background, whatever it is, but you still have to annotate all of those lanes that you actually choose to use for your manuscript, submit at the same time. They don't necessarily put it out there for all the readers to see, but at least the reviewers will see it. Tables, raw data that making up tables, and all that, right? So I think more and more journals now require you to do that. And I think it's a good right step forward. But many times your research partner might not know that is a requirement, So I think you need to convey that to your research partner that all data, raw data need to be safe because you need to report them, when it comes time to go for publication and things like that. Just a note.
That's good advice, Dr. Lee. The idea that you would have raw data that can be inspected by a third party, a third person, another lab, and get the same results, I think is important. And more and more journals are definitely asking for that to be done. I don't see any. Oh yeah, have any of you had partnerships that grew from online connections, or have they all been in-person contacts? This is Dr. Cardona.
Is there an app for that? I haven't signed up for it yet. I think most of my partnerships have been based on the people that I have made connections with in person rather than online. I can't even think of a person or a partner that I'm working with that, we may have been introduced online, but subsequently made an effort to meet in person and have the garage talk like Peter and John Oliver did, and make sure that interests are aligned and as our goals.
Yeah, I can only think of one that happened a few years ago where it actually turned out to be a local person in in Dairy Country, which is like Stearns County, basically center of Minnesota, that just reached out and was really interested in us doing research on their product. So I guess the lesson I learned there was that was fine that she reached out, but having that through multiple follow-up emails and then finally an in-person meeting, it took until the in-person meeting to realize that this was not the right match at all, right? And so I couldn't have got that out of electronic communication. And so yeah, things will start online, but you always want to end up sitting down with them and talking, I think.
And anyone else in the audience have online collaborations that has worked? Oh, you have a question. Anyone on Zoom? Okay, it looks like in person is a good idea.
I think you've already touched on this, but how do you evaluate whether your partnerships are effective collaborations?
Well, I think, one way is having clear milestones, right? Clear milestones that are defined by the grant, if the partnership is facilitated by a grant, but making sure that those milestones are met, on both sides. And if they're not, why? Understand why and how those issues can be addressed in order to push things forward. So, yeah, and with any team, you're going to have to, work together, reach those milestones, and be productive. So yeah, that's how I would navigate that.
I totally agree, and that's the easy first line of evaluating, are we successful as partners? I think beyond that, it's just, how are you working together? And that's more, we feel that internally. Are we creating new things together? Do we share the same excitement about what we're creating together? To me, that's kind of the litmus test of, is this partnership gonna take us beyond this grant, that with these current milestones, that yes, we're checking the box, or are we gonna do great science together? And I think that's kind of internal. We all feel that. And hopefully it's, that's part of where we find the joy in what we do too, because we have found the right partner our partners who help us get beyond the milestones and feel the excitement of not only achieving them, but going beyond.
Yeah, really, an exercise that's been very useful for me has been, and this was, again, I did not do this up until recently, but just having that honest conversation right at the beginning about both short-term and long-term, what do you really want out of this relationship? Just be frank, right? And oftentimes, I mean, all of us in this room, if we were asked that question about some relationship, we're probably going to have a short-term and a long-term vision, because we probably don't want to do it unless there's some potential for long-term. But you can learn a lot by just listening to the other partner and how they answer that question, as to, do they really actually have it? And I don't even frame it as short-term and long-term. I'm just like, what do you really want out of this? And you can tell pretty quickly if it's just an immediate need with not much thought about establishing a long-term relationship versus, I want to work with you for a while, right? I think you can tell that pretty quick.
Very good.
I know we're wrapping up here, but so you've talked a lot about research ethics. What for you are some real red flags, and maybe personally, where's the line in the sand?
You'll know the red flags as you'll have a feeling, right? And you have to pay attention to this. So from an ethics standpoint, and being fully aware of the agreements that are in place, the university's policies in your own lab, like you will see things that you're like, what? Wait a second, what? And that's important. It's really important. So when you have this head scratching kind of moment, you got to talk, right? Talk to others and figure out, like, is there something here or not? And you know, it depends on the level, you know, if that happens within the lab, right, making sure the PI knows and making sure that, you know, okay, yes, that was a red flag and we can address this. But if that happens, you know, at a higher level, with partners and whatnot, you know, it could be multi-institutional. You got to talk to your supervisor. You got to talk to the department chair. You got to talk to the folks in your college. And what should be really comforting is that there's great resources and guidance from the university, right? And so there are ways, there's structure in place in the system to help you, right, navigate those situations. But and it'd be interesting to hear what the others think, but in the situations where that red flag has come up, more often than not, yeah, it was kind of a red flag. And if you can catch it early and address it early before it becomes an issue, that's really, really important. But what you don't want is like, oh, there's a red flag. Oh, there's another one. And that, and then it can just cascade.
No, I think that's a great point. And this is kind of a random, but the one thing I've experienced is people who are in general overly protective of their data and you have to expect that depending on the situation, like a company is going to be protective of their data. Somebody who has the potential to develop some new IP is going to be protective of their data. But if they're beyond the realm of logic, overly protective of the data, that's usually a big red flag for me because it doesn't usually end well. And that comes back to just talking about depositing raw data and things like that, right? So that's one thing I've always been on the lookout for.
Great. You,
No, it's hard to build on these. It's very much the same, so.
well, let me ask a final question, and I think that we're running out of time. So looking ahead, what's your vision? What are the things that we need to be looking out for ethically as we do research today and going forward? This is again for all the early career investigators who are going into research. What are the things that you need to be looking for as you start your research program to be able to do it with ethically and with integrity?
I think starting off by knowing your values and knowing what your personal goals are and being able to center those with yourself. And having conversations with partners, like we've heard already about hearing the same from them. What are their values and what are their goals for the partnership, and moving forward with that. It's really important to have conversations about that upfront. But again, having that conversation internally with yourself first to know where you stand and what you want, and then being able to listen to that from your prospective partners is really important. And then as you find those partners, again, it is about, we have certain things we want to achieve with those partnerships. Products for research, you name it. But I think partnerships can be hard, but they should also be fun and they should be enjoyable. And if they are too hard, then find a new partner.
Good advice.
Really good advice. Really good advice. So yeah, it's as Tiffany said, establishing the value system early on, right? What's your value system? What's the value system of the lab? I'll give again, in my lab meetings, talking about professional development, I'll say like, we're here, you're here now, and you want to get somewhere here in the future, right? We're all working towards something. How are we going to get there? How are we going to get there in our career paths? And what do we need to do that in an ethical way, right? So it's establishing research ethics, that ethos early on as a strong foundation, right? And building off that. Because as Tiffany said, it can be incredibly rewarding. Like if you have a synergistic partnership, and you are conducting research as it should be done, that's incredible, right? There's just amazing things that can be done. So, and then establishing an environment where everybody has a voice and is comfortable with talking and sharing and can be vulnerable. So that's really, really important, right? Because if that environment is not available for folks, of the students, staff, the team, then that can create some difficult situations that could impact research integrity. So open lines of communication, not being afraid, the PIs, not being afraid to show vulnerability, making sure that the team is comfortable and can share and you can adapt and address things in real time, I think is really important.
All right, that's great advice for everybody. Thank you so much. Can we give up the panel a great hand, please?
We also just thank our moderator one last time. I thought he did a great job. Excellent. And then I just wanted to share a few things if I can find them. We have a couple of things going on next week. There is a lunch and learn. Oh boy, technology support. There's a lunch and learn next week at noon. So please RSVP for that. We would all like your support and participation. And then look for our other RIDE seminars coming up next in April, the second Wednesday of April. We have an invited speaker who's a colleague of Dr. Rob O'Connor coming here to speak to us about novel natural products as therapeutics for cancer and other things. So thank you all for joining us, and look for us in the future.